Hi stamping friends, Melissa Kerman here with Melissa's Crafting Treehouse. Today I'll be sharing one of my September-October 2019 club and free card kit projects. This project features the Daisy Lane bundle, which includes the Daisy Lane stamp set and medium daisy punch. I'll also be using an image from the Artisan Textures stamp set. My goal for this card was to make something with fall-themed colors, but also something that could be used really at any time of year. To get started, I'm going to be dry embossing the card body of my card using the Pinewood Planks embossing folder, and I am just dry embossing the front part of the card. And so I'm going to be sticking the front of my card into the embossing folder, and I want to overlap that fold just a little bit. You will of course have to fold your card before you do this step so you'll know where you want the embossing to go to. And I've overlapped maybe about 1/8 of an inch. I figure I want to make sure I'm covering the whole front of the card, and if I do a little bit of the back, that's okay. It's better than not having the whole thing dry embossed on the front. Now when you do your dry embossing, you want to make sure that the fold of the embossing folder is going in first. And I learned this the hard way because one of my embossing folders actually broke at the crease, at the fold. And that's because you're putting tension on the embossing folder if you go through the other direction and sort of pushing it, and it can break the fold. And there you can see that some of the dry embossing got on the back, and I'm just using my bone folder to burnish that edge and also to smooth out the portion on the back that got dry embossed. So I'm going to start with my crumb cake ink and just going to go ahead and sponge the front of the card just a little bit, and that will just bring out some of the texture of the dry embossing so it shows some more. Now I'm only doing the top and the bottom because those are the only parts that are going to be exposed after I finish my focal piece on the front. Now you can do it as light or dark as you want. I kind of went a little darker on the card that I'm working on now versus the one that I did before. So now I'm going to start working on the stamping for my focal piece. It's sized so that the focal piece should be the exact same length as the layer in behind. Now the focal piece is actually a piece of shimmery white cardstock, which is not quite vanilla and not quite white. It's somewhere in between those two, and it has a really lovely little shimmer to it, which you may be able to see on camera, I'm not sure. But it's beautiful paper, and it can be used much like watercolor paper to some extent. It's just thicker and can handle more water than a regular ultra smooth cardstock, but not quite as thick as watercolor paper. So I'm going to start with stamping my little mini daisies, and I've stamped one of the images, and now I'm doing a little bit of a turn and superimposing a second image over the top that's with second inking. And there I'm doing that again in the lower right hand corner. And the daisies will really be the anchor for the whole design, so that's why I wanted to start with the daisies first. Now this third daisy image that I'm stamping is actually going to get covered up, but I like to put it there anyway just because then you might see some of the stamping in behind the punched piece, and then you also help decide where to stamp the other images around it more easily. So now I'm going to stamp some daisies on some scrap pieces of the shimmer white cardstock, and these are going to then be punched out. Now it's important when you do the stamping for the daisy that you orient the petals so that two of them are straight up and down, and that's relative to the edge of the cardstock. And that's because of the shape of the punch itself. It's just easier to punch when it's oriented in the same way as the punch itself. So now you can see I'm stamping the daisy so that it's not exactly oriented the way I described it, with the two of the petals parallel to the edge or perpendicular to the edge of the cardstock, and it makes it a lot harder to find where to punch the daisy out from. So now I'm doing it the way I originally described, with those two petals straight up and down. Next, I'm going to take my bone folder and very carefully curl the edges of the daisy flower just to give it a little bit more of a realistic look and to give it some dimension. Now, it's important when you do this that you hold on to the delicate or thin part of the petal. Otherwise, when you use your bone folder, you might actually rip that petal off or any of those petals off. So you may notice I'm doing the fold or the curl for one of the daisies so that the petal curves back and one so that the petal curves to the front. Now I'm just going to attach the one daisy to the other with a glue dot and just doing it a little quarter turn or whatever to get the petals oriented so it fills out that daisy. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of my stamping. I'm going to use Mossy Meadow ink for the fern. Now I love this fern image. It's, I think, my favorite image in the whole set. So now you can see I inked it up once and I stamped it 4 times, orienting it a little bit different each time. And that way I get different depths of color. Now on high speed I'm doing the rest of the stamping of my ferns, and I am using first, second, third, and in some cases fourth and fifth ink for my images. Last but not least, I'm bringing in my crushed curry ink, and I'm going to be using that one image from the Artisan texture set. And this is really just going to be kind of filler. I think of it as sort of pollen floating in the air. It just adds a little bit of color and a little bit more texture and interest to the focal piece. And I'm just stamping it randomly here and there in those open white spaces, first, second, and third inking. So now I'm ready to move on to my assembly. So now I'm going to do my tearing of the background piece that's going to go in behind the focal piece. And as you can see, I have a very large piece to start with. That gives me a lot of room to tear easily because it's easier to grip the paper and control the shape of the tear. Now when I tear the piece on the left toward me, I'm exposing the inside layers of the cardstock on the right side. This is the torn edge that you want to see that will frame the focal piece. Now I've put a tiny little bit of adhesive on the back side of my focal piece so I can get it into the position that I will want it to be in the end and gauge how much to pull off or tear off on the other side of the Cajun Craze piece of cardstock. As you can see here, I'm controlling the shape of the tear by holding the edge of the cardstock with my fingertips. And again, the Cajun Craze cardstock is the same width as the other 2 layers. Now I've got just a few more little steps on this. I've used a piece of the braided linen trim and tied it around the bottom of the card body. I'm justifying my focal piece up towards the top so I'll have room for my linen trim on the bottom. And I've also added another little element that's a approximately 1/8 inch wide strip of the Mossy Meadow cardstock. I felt like it just needed a little bit more color at the bottom and something of to add some more interest besides the linen trim, which is pretty close to the same color as the cardstock behind it. So now I'm using my multi-purpose liquid glue. I'm going to put the tiniest little line of glue along the bottom, and this is going to be how I'm going to attach my Mossy Meadow cardstock. It's much easier to put the glue on the card body than have to put it on that tiny little strip and not get the glue all over your fingers. So now all I have to do is place that strip right down onto the glue and get it so that it's straight, and because the glue doesn't stick immediately, I have a little bit of latitude to reposition it and make sure it's straight and parallel to the bottom edge of the card body. Now next all I have to do is tie my braided linen trim around the bottom of the card body. Now when you're tying a piece like this on a card body or on any piece of cardstock, I tend to tie it tighter so that the paper maybe bows just the tiniest little bit, because when you actually let go of the tie, or when you're making the knot, the ribbon tends to release a little bit and get looser. So by allowing it to bow at the beginning, it just ends up being flat in the end. So now my knot ended up being a little bit more towards the center than I wanted, so just bowing the cardstock, rounding it so that I can move that ribbon more easily to where I want it to be. Okay, can't forget that last little embellishment that I created with the layered daisies. I'm just going to use a glue dot on the back side of my daisy and superimpose it right over the daisy at the top. Now you could leave this card as is, but I wanted to give it a little bit more bling. So next I'm going to be adding some gold faceted gems to the center of each of these daisies. Now I've used one large gem on the daisy that's punched in there on the front, and then I'm going to use two smaller faceted gems, gold faceted gems, in the center of the other two daisies. And I used my handy take your pick tool to pick up the faceted gems and place them where I wanted them. Finally, I'm going to do a little bit of stamping on the inside with that fern image that I love. And now I'm just putting adhesive on my inside piece and attaching it to the inside. I hope you've enjoyed my project today using the Daisy Lane Bundle and Artisan Textures stamp set. As a reminder, this is one of my club and free card kit projects for September and October 2019. The kit for this project will come with pieces that are pre-cut, dry embossed, and punched. Check out the link in the video description below to learn how you can get free card kits. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. To learn more about what I create and offer, check out the description below this video for lots of information and useful resources. Thanks for joining me today, and happy crafting!